Though there are many, many artifacts around the world in museums from ancient Egypt and ancient civilizations, one has to wonder what they have there that nobody gets to look at or look over very often, in hidden back places, in drawers, in boxes, and in places that you may not ever hear about. Sometimes these things can be found right there in front of your face, and this is one case of such. See if you can at first tell what this artifact might be, for people have looked at it on exhibit for on 60 years at least, and haven't really been able to discern what it is. Now again, this has been on exhibit. One thing this was called is a piece of a scale or a balance that no longer exists. Perhaps the horizontal bar. Except you'd think if you had to try to use this as a balance, because it's got that round thing and the stick going across it, a special stick on the back, that there'd be a notch in this end and that end, and you'd hang weights on it and try to make a balance or a basket and put weights in it and do things too. But they already know what these balances look like that these people were building. What do you think we're looking at? It's got a little extra iconography on it, and I remember somebody saying that this was a piece of a chair that was found and the rest of the chair was gone, that the tomb that this was in was looted, but they didn't take everything, and that's what it ended up being. But that's not the truth of the matter either. You can see this man's name scribbled right here on the stick, and above it and across in a row, a lot of these perfectly separated little lines that we know of as a sun symbol or a marking point. So that ought to tell you something. And down here on what is the circular part of it here has a medallion. Looks like a flower, and then around that flower is a ring, and the ring has spikes zigzagging all around it. What do you think that's for? Well, this was found in an ancient Egyptian tomb back in 1911, I believe, in the Wayback Machine, and some of the parts were still there in the tomb. A lot of it's evident. Most of it's on exhibit now at this point. Anything that looks neat, not just cracked all to pieces. So here's a representation of what it looked like a little bit more in a 3D schematic. Has those dots on the top of it too, and somebody's went through the trouble of putting an extra cutting in there and then making that top piece of wood very flat. What do you think this is for? I don't want to sit and tease you like where are we at videos, but this is something along that line. Now, without looking at it through glass here, you can see it a little bit better. Tell you what we're looking at. In the middle of that flower, where the little part is where the bees get to and bugs and things, there's another little center dot there that's just like the center dots that are all across this top wooden stick here. Something could be put in there, but it'd have to be a little pin, something made kind of finite. And what could you do with this thing, though? Well, some people realize that, and probably the guy that figured this out, it seems that flowers aren't always just flowers. And there's this symbolic flower of life. and other symbology that's on here. And because this was actually found in the tomb of Ka, who was an architect during the 18th dynasty and the reigns of Akenaten King Tut, and he had built some of these things, that this had much more to do with it. And his idea and knowing of sacred geometry, now that hooked up, led him to believe a different thing here. For, on medallions and so on sometimes, or certain objects, or on the wall in a certain place sometimes in these Egyptian tombs, there'll be a symbol. And sometimes it'll look out of place, like the flower of life that's actually shown in the Osirian temple that's right there. One that has the water always in the bottom of it, and the huge blocks that look out of place with pretty much every other architectural form that's there. But it has one on it too, inscribed and etched into it. And sometimes these things meant more to people than meets the eye, as to say. Whereas to somebody, this might be a fancy little stick with some designs on it. Maybe it's the back stick of a chair where there's 3 or 4 chairs, or 3 or 4 sticks going across the back of the chair is what I meant to say, and it's one of them or something like that. No, these architects, and whenever they get buried with something that has a symbology, and yeah, there are chairs and stuff like that that people get buried with, but they generally get buried with their accoutrements and stuff that goes along with it. And the reason that we don't find more of these is because that's one of the reasons that some of these scribes and architects and so on tombs got broken into in elder times. Rather than them being nobility and having a little more gold along with other artifacts that are extremely usable for things like this and this building concept going on, being able to square off blocks. But you can square off blocks and do all kinds of things. What does this thing actually break down and help you do other than those objects that we know there? Well, you can cut a bunch of angles by using a string and a line. And so this thing is actually the oldest known protractor known to man. It's believed they had a device like this in Sumer to do with the MEs and lay out everything too, in a way. And its evidence might actually be right in front of us somewhere too, that no one's really looking at or making the connections. But the flower petals here, if you cut it off and you were to make that out of a sacred flower symbol that goes on, there's 16 declamations that go around this thing, and then a symbolic 18 that goes on it too. And then that has to do with sun symbology and actually the cycles of lunar cycles that go along with it. Sacred geometry numbers. Now we know we've got to have something going on here. Well, this is the world's earliest protractor. Now, that 16 spoke element that's there, and you may recognize this as being a nautical type symbol. And those 16 declamations that are around it is something that I learned in Boy Scouts, because it worked with us having to learn a compass and so on. Going through merit badges, we ended up having to do this Pathfinder option where they ended up showing us on a map, giving us an idea of where we were going, and then we had to go find it. We did that a couple of times to make sure we aren't going to get lost and all that crap. And when we were on a summer jamboree thing that we were on to get a special merit badge in that same Pathfinder concept, we ended up having to do find it across a lake. And in doing so, and knowing the compass and everything that went along with that, we were able to get a good eye shot where we were looking at. And even though we had to go over and cross the bridge and catch back in line, we were able to do that very easy and find the spot, which was a Coke can sitting on top of a painted stick that was stuck in the ground. Looked like somebody took a croquet mallet and broke the mallet part of it off and then shoved it in the ground and put the can on it, which we brought back and showed them. And then they told us we had to go all the way back and put that back because there's other people going to do this same thing. And we're like, yeah, but we wanted to tell you proof. Well, you could have just told us what did you see when you got there. Anyhow, so that doesn't seem, well, it's real 3D and cool, but that doesn't necessarily seem like a compass or a protractor to a lot of people, but it works with navigation. In fact, this is the representation that you probably remember for school. And looking at it, it goes from 0 to 180 degrees, and then of course without having to flip it over and read backwards or doing so, it goes the other way on the same. And there's all these lines that are cut into it. You can find ones that have extra fancy stuff to it, but this type of object has been found in the Greeks and so on. They come out of that, and everybody says, oh, they got it from the Library of Alexandria. Actually, the sundial used to work off of this concept. Kind of looks like it right there. And the declamations of time and degrees and how it all works with the sun moving. And by utilizing this and a compass, you can end up nautically navigating, but you have to know time over time too. So you have to have a time device, or you can get off by a little bit. And actually, you don't really have to know where north is. If you're sitting still someplace, you can watch where the sun sets or rises and sets every day. And if you take and have somebody with your viewpoint that you watch this happen at and put markers at, measure across there in that line, that's going to end up running east to west no matter what. And if we cut it this way just right by measuring that and cutting it in half and squaring it up over here and doing the same thing, we can find out what true north is too, to a decent enough degree to actually navigate across the ocean. And it is what we use on atlases, like Atlantis, Atlas. What we use for atlases always as a marker of north, south, east, west and everything, but every 16 points is around that, where you don't actually have north and east, but you have northeast, but in between there's north, northeast and east, northeast and cut points. And you can also see the symbology that's there. I've seen a lot of real fancy ones on maps too, and sometimes they show little flower of life concepts going on and some geometry that you probably wouldn't recognize unless you were looking for such things. But this flower of life that we're looking at there can be used for nautical, but here we go with astrotheological. No, we're going to use it to build pyramids and so on. How can you use that? We can use it by a plumb bob situation, knowing the gradients that's there. So when the line runs down off of this that you have and you pin it, or you can pin it actually here on that little hole that they have there and run it off to do simple checks and make sure something is exactly flat. You don't see it off the little hole on the line and the dot. So you can make sure something's flat and real good like that, but also if you set it on an angle like an inclined plane like over here, it can show your degrees. It'll show it in the flower, it'll show it on the spike spokes, and they know that representation real well, but also it'll cut across and there are dots along here. And it seems like these dots that are along here are the accepted places and different pieces that they're allowed to cut things at certain angles, if you will, to make things at. There's going to be one angle or another, and how that all fits together. So just another way to show that these ancient Egyptians had some incredible stuff going on And another piece in the puzzle of the myriad of tools that the ancient Egyptians used to not only make cubes like you see here, but even on slopes and angles, and the cubes that would have been used for the outside of the pyramid, which are all shaved off to a certain point, and to make sure that's right. And that tool right there is a simple checkpoint for that. Something that's left in the toolbox of Ka, an 18th dynasty architect who helped make some of the famous tombs or temples that we know that still exist today, or what's left of it. Let me know what y'all think down below. Peace.